in the studio with me today, I have a special guest who's been a long time coming. This is Amber Adrian. I knew I was going to do that. She has
Everybody
two first
does.
names. And I circled it on my page, and I was like,
All good.
Almost did it. Amber is a somewhat recent convert to the church. Last year, you came into the church at Easter time. Amber reached out to me about this time-ish last year, maybe a little before that,
A little
wasn't
before,
it?
I think, yeah.
Yeah, she reached out to me about maybe wanting to write for the Bishop's Bulletin, and found out she's going to be converting, and we were like, well, maybe we'll wait until you convert. So this interview and her meeting her and her coming here is about a year in the making. So I'm very excited to learn about you, Amber. We're going to hear about your conversion story today. Get to know you a little bit. And I think, judging by what I've seen so far, this is going to be a good story. So
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in.
Yes, thank you so much. This is great.
Yeah. So let's just start, if you will. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, your family, what you're doing now.
Yeah. I grew up outside of Mitchell on a farm kind of by Mount Vernon.
Okay.
And moved away, went to USD in Vermilion, and then lived
I won't hold that against you.
Oh, you won't? Are you an SDSU
SDSU.
grad? Oh, so are my brothers. Used to it. Yeah, and then went to California to work, and then moved to the Twin Cities to work. Met my husband there, and then about 6 years ago, we moved back to the Mitchell area when I was pregnant with my second. We have 3 girls.
Nice.
Ages 7, 5, and 2.5. Yeah, met my husband there. He's an engineer.
Is he from South Dakota originally?
No, he's from the Twin Cities.
Okay.
Yeah, where we met.
All right.
Yeah.
How's he liking it here?
It's
was not an immediate, yes, it's awesome.
No, it's not. He likes the slower pace of life. You know, we moved here on purpose for a slower pace of life and no income tax and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, so he likes them, but it's been an adjustment. And his whole family lives in the Twin Cities, so it's a little bit hard, you know.
That does make it an adjustment.
Yeah. So that's my family. And then as far as work goes, I used to be an English teacher. I was a middle school English teacher. I was not an education major. I was an English major in Vermilion. And then I did the program Teach for America.
Okay.
I don't know if you're familiar, but they place you in like a high needs area, very rural or very urban. So I was in Los Angeles doing that 2-year commitment.
Okay.
Moved to the Twin Cities, helped start a charter school there, an all-girls charter school, which was amazing. And then got kind of burned out of teaching and got married at the same time. And my husband said I could quit. So then I quit. And that's when I started dabbling in writing.
Yeah.
You know, I knew that I was going to be home with my kids. We both had a mom at home or mostly at home. And so we wanted that. And so that's part of the reason I left and started writing, doing some freelancing. And so now that's basically what I do for work.
Yeah.
I'm a freelance writer and I'm an at-home parent. I'm a mother.
I'm so glad you guys chose to do the at-home parenting thing. 'Cause I think that's so, it's actually really, really critical in our world right now is for parents to really focus on their families.
Yeah. And
in
it's
whatever way they do.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. And it's very countercultural, you know, especially if you're an educated woman, you know, ambitious woman, it feels kind of like the wrong choice according to culture.
Right.
And so, but it's been good. And I've been able to still work and, you know, do paid work, not work because, you know, at-home parents work, but to to find a way to still use my education and my passions and stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go to, you obviously, before you became Catholic, you had some relation to faith.
Yeah.
So will you tell us what your faith was like before that?
Yeah, it's I've always been a seeker type. I always have wanted to know what's true, you know. And then I've also been a skeptic. I have kind of a skeptical personality. It's very hard for me to just be like, go along with stuff that doesn't really resonate for me or that doesn't land for me. And so although I grew up in a very strong Christian family, my parents did an amazing job trying to, you know, instill the faith. It never really felt like anything that was meaningful to me.
Sure.
I remember going to church only to gossip with my friends about what we had done the night before.
Sure.
You know, it just didn't, and I didn't dislike it. I remember being frustrated that it seemed like everyone around me could just believe in all this stuff. And
it seemed easy for them. Yeah.
Yeah. and I wanted to. I just couldn't. It didn't feel true to me. It didn't feel meaningful to my life. And so my parents don't like me saying this, of course, but I really don't feel like I was a Christian until I was in Los Angeles. And I was very humbled during those 2 years. It's very hard work.
Yeah.
I was in graduate school full-time and teaching basically in the inner city. Really hard. So I was very humbled.
Yeah.
And I had a friend. I made my best friend out there was in Teach for America as well. And she was a strong Christian, and she was very similar to me. She was interesting and thoughtful, and I just really connected with her, you know. And she hadn't grown up in a Christian household either, which I thought was so interesting, right? Like, so that was sort of compelling to me to be like, oh, so you like believe all this stuff really deeply, but it's not just from your parents, you know? So I think that was like part of it. And then I started, I read some books during those 2 years. Like I read Mere Christianity.
Oh, yeah.
And I read some other things, and I was like, oh, okay, like there can be, like it started making more sense and clicking in a little bit. So that I would say I became a Christian during that time.
Sure.
But then it was many, many years of exploring different streams of Christian, different denominations. Even when we got married, my husband grew up Catholic.
Okay.
But I was pretty anti-Catholic, as happens in Protestantism. You know, I just was like, I'm not interested in religion, right? And the Catholics are the most religious, and I'm, you know, it just, you know, all that stuff was there.
Yeah.
And so Catholicism wasn't really on the table for us, even though I think my husband would have liked it to be. But he didn't feel strongly about it either, so he was open. So we tried all kinds of different churches. And it was intentional. It was like different things resonated at different times. Like we went to John Piper's church for a while.
Okay.
I don't know if you're familiar with Bethlehem Baptist. Very, very intellectual preaching. Very, you know, breaking down verses by prepositions and different things. And it just that appealed to my intellect. And then at one point we were at a Vineyard Church, which is like a charismatic.
Oh,
very
wow. You really did try them all out.
Oh, we really did. I told you I'm like a seeker type. I really want to find what resonates for me, you know? And so we tried all kinds of different things. And so that's sort of where I was at before starting to be open to Catholicism.
Okay. So I love how you're talking about, I was reading books and I read Mere Christianity. Like that's just some, you know, paperback you picked up off the table.
It's so good.
It is. It's a really good book. Okay. So what happened to make you even consider the Catholic Church, and how did you come to decide to convert?
Yeah, so it was a series of small things, it felt like. I remember the church that we were at last in the Twin Cities was like this large non-denominational church, but they had quoted a Catholic in the sermon, a Catholic writer that I had never heard of. And I went home and looked him up and got one of his books from the library. And I was like,
who was that?
Oh, Richard Rohr.
Okay.
Who I know, he's sort of not Orthodox. I've learned at this point, and I definitely have come to be like, I don't quite align with that. But that was the first author that I was like, oh, this deeply resonates with me, the way he's talking about Christianity. So that was like a moment. I remember that, this Christian writer. And then I remember there was another point where I sort of realized these other writers that I like were Catholic. I had never really put two and two together, but I'm a big reader, if you can't, you know. And so like Henry Nouwen, you know, and different people, I was like, oh, Catholic, Thomas Merton, Catholic, you know. And I remember at one point being like, okay. And so that was like a little bit more of an opening. I read, are you familiar with Leah Jacobson?
No.
She is from Minnesota.
Okay.
She has a nonprofit called the Guiding Star Project.
Okay.
I read her book, Holistic Feminism, and that was a big moment for me because I was like, I became very disillusioned with feminism. I had defined as a feminist for a long time and became very disillusioned with it when I became a mother.
Sure.
And her book I was like, this is all my thoughts from the last 5 years since I became a mother, like in a book. And she's Catholic.
Yep,
So
of course.
it was just like thing after thing where I was like, these kind of seem like my people. And then I think really the moment where we ended up starting to go to Mass was I was in the coffee shop, our local coffee shop with two friends, one Catholic, one Protestant. And we were talking about faith-related things. And I remember during this particular conversation, I had a lot of things to say about my frustrations with different things with the faith. And she told me later that she had just felt like a prompting in a sense that I would be open to Catholicism because of that conversation. And she invited me to their small group, to Mass, etc. And we still hadn't really landed anywhere, even in Mitchell. We tried the Episcopal church and this church, and we tried going to church with my parents, and just nothing had really. And so then we started going to Mass. And then around that same time, we got the priests that we have now.
Father Cesar, and
right around
Father
that
Amato.
same time. And I just starting to talk to them, asking my questions, and just going to Mass and seeing the depth and seeing all the things that it is. I was like, oh, this is it.
It finally hit me.
It just was sort of, I don't remember, those are the moments that stand out to me, Like I said, I have 3 little kids, so there might be something I'm not remembering.
Sure.
Because it's sort of chaotic, my life. But yeah, that's about what it was.
So you had a friend who, of course, probably have heard the vision of our diocese, lifelong Catholic missionary discipleship through God's love.
Yeah, I have.
Your friend did exactly the missionary discipleship thing that Bishop DeGroot is asking us all to do.
Yep.
She saw a friend who was open.
Yeah.
And she invited.
Yeah, and it wasn't in a pushy way.
Right.
She was just like, I just feel like you might, no pressure.
Yeah.
But like we do this small group thing. You could come. You don't have to come to Mass. I mean, it was just, and we were friends. We had been friends. She knows me, and it just felt right.
Yeah.
So we did it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so great.
Yeah.
Okay, Amber, what was Easter Vigil like for you? Is this where the crying will be?
Yeah. Well, I can tell
Maybe.
you. So it's interesting. It's late at night, right? So we actually got a babysitter. We left our kids at home. We were unsure if we should bring them.
It is a long Mass.
Yeah, and it's a long Mass, and our kids are sort of small. And so we got a babysitter. My parents and my brother came, and they're not Catholic.
Oh, that's
they're
lovely,
Lutheran.
though. That's great.
So I felt very supported in that way. And it was beautiful. I loved it. And during the time where you turn around and face the congregation, I almost burst into tears. It was very hard to not just embarrassingly start sobbing in front of everyone.
Everyone would have been just fine with that.
But that was the moment where and it was wonderful. I felt so excited to finally be able to partake in the Eucharist and, all the things, because we had been going to Mass for actually quite a while, of course, and or what felt like a while, I guess it was just a year or so. And to not be able to participate in basically the second half of the Mass felt hard, Yeah. And so I was so happy to have it finally culminate.
Yeah. How's it been
great.
for your husband, too? And even the two of you together as a married couple?
It's been wonderful.
Yeah.
It's been so good for our marriage, for our family, just to have a united, sort of system and just be united on such a deep level.
Yeah.
And it's meaningful to him because he grew up Catholic and his whole family is still Catholic, and he's
good.
very close with his family. So that's felt really good for him.
Yeah. And he can come home to the church and have his wife there with him, which is really good. And it's really
been great.
I have no idea what that's all been like for him. But at some point there was probably these thoughts in his head where it's like, oh, I really hope she comes or whatever. And sometimes as that other spouse, you have to be really patient and never push.
Yeah.
Now, maybe that wasn't the case for you guys. It might not have been because he had been away from the church for a little while.
Yeah.
But,
And I don't think he really, he was not really a devout Catholic.
Right.
He was, and so it wasn't, but it has been amazing. I mean, it's been so meaningful to him, like I said. But I don't think he was waiting for me to come to Catholicism. It just wasn't like that.
Right.
But he is so happy that
I'm glad.
have. It's been
Good.
wonderful.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what's been your favorite part of Catholicism? Because you are a very intellectual, and I think so. That's one thing that I would say I have in common with you is a lot of my faith comes to me intellectually first, and then into the heart later. And it seems like you're also that way.
I am.
Yeah.
I am. But it's interesting because this was hard to answer because there's so many things, so many things. But a big piece of it for me has been, and this isn't the thing, but this is a big piece of it, so I want to mention it along with the other thing, has been a feeling of true and deep honoring of womanhood and motherhood in a way that I have so deeply craved. I'm reading this memoir that I have in front of me right now, Abigail Favale's. I don't know if you're familiar with her.
I am, yes.
It's her conversion memoir, and she has such a similar story to me. There's a line in here where she says, I became a feminist and I identified with feminism because I felt like there was something special about being a woman, and I wanted to have my dignity as a woman affirmed. And she said, and I found that in the Catholic Church. And I was like, that's exactly how I feel, because mainstream feminism for me doesn't affirm women as women.
Right.
It's sort of like this message. The message is to be empowered, you need to become more like a man. Right. Which is not ever what I was looking for.
No.
In feminism, and just this deep honoring of women as women has been so meaningful to me.
Right.
Just obviously with Mary and the female saints, and just that, I could talk about that forever. So that was a huge, huge piece for me. But really, I think the biggest thing I love is, and it's interesting that you bring up the intellectual thing, because for me, it has been the embodiment, because for me, faith was always very intellectual. I was always trying to figure out, okay, what's what, and what's, do I really believe this thing, and do I believe this thing, and about the Bible, and what do I, trying to analyze the Bible, all very rational, intellectual. I love that there's so much acknowledgement that we live in bodies.
Yes.
We're not just minds.
Right.
We live in bodies, from the kneeling, the genuflecting, to the sign of the cross, to the Eucharist being Jesus coming into our body. Just all these very, these experiences that very much acknowledge that we are human beings, like in a body.
And that matters.
And it matters. Even like reconciliation, people will say, well, why can't you just confess your sins to God? And it's like, well, because this is a gift that was given to us to have another human being sit across from us and for us to hear the words from another person. Yep. You're forgiven. So it's just so I've never seen that anywhere, and I've tried a lot of different things.
She might have tried them all.
Truly, and there's never been such an honoring of, and this is another thing I love, just the both and. There's such a both and spirit in Catholicism. So it's of course it's the intellect. There's such deep intellectualism in Catholicism, but there's also such deep embodiment.
Yes,
where it's like it's not about intellectually assenting to certain things. It's also worshiping with your body in very meaningful ways.
Yes.
And I love that.
Yes. That's beautiful. I love it. What's been the most challenging thing for you? Because usually when people convert, there's some sort of challenge that you probably may still be working to overcome.
Yeah. Honestly, there's been so many good things. There haven't been much. I mean, it's been just blessing after blessing after blessing. It's been such a good thing. Probably the hardest thing is just my family. Not being Catholic. My family of origin, my parents and my two brothers and their wives. So not being able to go to church anymore with my family. Yeah. And then not being able to, take communion in the church I grew up in.
Sure.
And them not, if they're willing to come to Mass with us. They have come to Mass with us. But, then they can't take communion.
Right.
And so we're close as a family. So that doesn't feel optimal. Yeah. That's probably the hardest thing.
Yeah. What's been the biggest blessing?
Oh, man. So many. But I think... I think for me, it's just been the deep spiritual growth that I've had. I mean, it's been, I feel like finally I'm in a place where all of my questions, all of my doubts, all of my intense self with all of my desire to know things super deeply, there's like something that can hold that. Yeah. And with that also has come like a big reduction in my anxiety. I think. Okay. Just having such a robust container that just makes sense. Yeah. There's this like, and I'm trying to think of how to explain it exactly, but just my spiritual growth has skyrocketed. Yeah. And it's like I feel like I have a place to land and it makes sense for me. And I don't have to withhold or pretend to believe anything. All the teachings, I'm just like, yep, that's spot on. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, when you find the truth and you can kind of close your mind on that truth, that would help like lessen your anxiety because you're like, I see it. Now I don't have to try to find it all the time. Yeah, and I think I still have some questions. I'm still
Sure.
new. I'm still
Yep.
a newbie, but I really have explored the teachings of the church pretty deeply.
Yeah.
And I just am like, I'm always amazed at the thoughtfulness and the depth
Yeah.
that's there. And my prayer life too has exponentially become
Yeah.
better.
Oh,
I
good.
did a silent retreat last
Yeah.
year
At Broomtree?
yes.
Nice.
And that was life-changing.
Yep.
So prayer life is the spiritual life, but it's just, my prayer life has gotten so much better. I feel so close to God.
That's great.
And that just impacts everything, right?
Yeah,
Of
it
course.
does. It does.
Yeah.
We have about a minute left, Amber.
Okay.
Is there a particular saint? Now, sometimes converts aren't jumping into the saints right away.
Yeah.
But is there a particular saint that
Well,
you have been turning to?
I haven't really embraced the practice of speaking with the saints yet. Not because of anything. I just
Right.
sort of haven't gotten there.
You can't do everything at once,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, there's a lot, right?
Yes.
It's so rich, it's so deep. So I haven't really gone there. But my confirmation saint is Teresa of Avila.
Oh, yes.
Who I really
That totally
connect
makes sense.
with. Oh, does it?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, I sort of had to pick one, and I was scrambling, and Father Yamato suggested
She
her.
fits you.
Yeah, and he knows me really well.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of conversations, and so I looked into her, and she seemed pretty feisty and quite intellectual. And strong, and so. Yeah, I hope to have a relationship with her in the future. I just haven't really gone there yet. I guess.
That'll be fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. We are out of time. I knew that was going to go fast with you. So I'm sure we'll be getting to know you more as you write for us for the Bishop's Bulletin. And,
I'm looking forward to it.
Who knows where else things will lead. So
Awesome.
Thank you so much for coming in and telling your story.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
This has been great.
Good. All right. If you haven't found us already on social media, you can always find us at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube at SF Diocese. And of course, sfcatholic.org. You can find us at the website anytime. That's it for us today. Hope you'll join us next week for more Catholic Views.